need to make sure that I connect. I just, if I don't respond right away, it's because maybe I haven't seen it or something like that. But sure, I think having questions anytime would be fine.
Okay, great. Welcome, Danae. Welcome, Debbie. Thank you for that, Vicki. Could I have a volunteer to monitor the chat in case people want to ask questions in the chat? I'm going to keep time. Thank you, Laura. Thanks very much. So if people do want to either ask Vicki or Bill or Brent or myself questions, I know I'm facilitating, but I'm not an unbiased facilitator in this session because I've had the privilege of, well, it's not the privilege, the education of watching my neighbors in highest hogs per hectare in Western Canada and how they are not being monitored in the production of industrial hog pork. So I really welcome this discussion this evening. And after welcoming you all, so let's just say that I have been totally privileged to have been able to work with Vicki Burns, as she's been such a leader in animal protection and respect for all sentient life, both through her work with the Winnipeg Humane Society and in her protection of Lake Winnipeg, and pointing out the issues that we're going to be speaking to this evening. So thank you so much for being with us here, Vicki. Please share with us what it is that you want to share this evening.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Janine. I want to say the same back to you. It's been it's just been tremendous to work with you for the past 20 years, really. Although
Yes.
we did take a hiatus for about 10 years when we thought the hog industry was going downhill, but unfortunately, that didn't last. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm not sure how many of you know all of this stuff. I hope I don't bore you, but I'm going to talk about the very basics on why we at Hog Watch Manitoba are really trying to push the industry in a different direction. I should make it clear right from the start. I know some of you probably wish that we were never raising pigs to be killed and eaten. And personally, I kind of feel that way, but I think that's not Hog Watch Manitoba. We think that probably there's going to be pigs raised in Manitoba for quite a number of years, but if they could at least have a decent life, we wouldn't feel so badly about what's happening to them. So I'm going to talk about three things. One is, why are we concerned about the animal welfare? Why is it really so horrendous in the factory style hog industry? I'm going to talk about the environmental concerns related to pollution of air, pollution of water. I'm going to talk very briefly about the human health risks on what's going on. And then finally, what is it that we at Hog Watch are actually pushing for? So essentially, the factory style hog industry, where there are, I hate to even call them barns because they're not like the old fashioned barns. There can easily be, 1,500 to 2,000 pigs in one barn. And then on one site, there could be several of those buildings. So it wouldn't be uncommon. Actually, the average number of pigs per farm site right now, according to Statistics Canada, is close to 6,000. And it used to be, back in the early 90s, it was less than 500. So just think about how those animals are being squeezed together. They're living in just tremendously cramped conditions in buildings that have slatted floors over pits that contain their own urine and feces. So that there's no straw on the floor for them to root in. They have to live in these areas where there's the slats on the floor. Their urine and feces falls through, and then the gas from those from their waste ends up coming back up and would actually suffocate them within a couple of hours if there wasn't really strong ventilation systems. We know that in the past few years, there's been at least 2 or 3 occasions where the power has gone out, a big storm or something has happened, the backup generator doesn't work, and they end up finding, 3,000 to 5,000 pigs suffocated to death within a couple of hours. So how unhealthy that is. And then, of course, the sows that are living in gestation stalls, which apparently at least half the sows in Manitoba are still in those stalls are so tiny, they're 2 feet by 7 feet. The pig can take maybe one step forward, one step backward. She cannot turn around from the age of 6 months until about 2 years, when most of these sows are culled. That's the size of the space that she lives in. She eats, sleeps, urinates, defecates, gives birth to her young, nurses her young, all in that tiny space. So the animal welfare, I mean, it's just a horrendous life. And for the pigs that are the baby pigs and the grower pigs, I mean, they're so jammed together. They have no straw. They can't do what they're instinctually driven to do, which for pigs is to use their snout to root around, to find food to chew on, to use their snout even to create a nest. So instead of doing that, because they're so jam-packed, they tend to bite each other's tails. So now the industry just flips off their tails instead of changing their living conditions. So the whole thing is it's very inhumane. And around the world, lots of places are saying we've got to change how these animals are raised. They're sentient beings, and it's really cruel. So that's the animal welfare concern. The environmental concern, I'll talk first about the manure. So the pits that are under these barns are flushed out into a holding lagoon that's relatively close to the barn. And that lagoon, I think, usually needs to be emptied twice a year. And it's applied to land as a fertilizer. It's either sprayed on or injected. The industry tries to say that it's injected 6 inches or something, and that way it doesn't run off as easily. But we can't really say that that's for sure what's happening. But in that manure, there is phosphorus and nitrogen, and those two elements are important for anything that grows. So they actually are good fertilizer, but only if it's applied in the right amount at the right time to the right crop. Right now in Manitoba, we have a regulation that allows hog producers to put 5 times as much manure on that piece of land as what any crop can use in 1 year. In other words, there's no crop that can take all the phosphorus and nitrogen out of that amount of manure in 1 year. It can take 1 year's worth, but the rest that's sitting there for the next 4 years, the producer is supposed to not apply it for another 4 years. But we know that phosphorus and nitrogen when the snow melts in the winter, in the spring, some of it runs off. If there's a big rainstorm, there's runoff from that field. If there's a flood, look at what happened recently around Steinbach, that horrendous rainfall where lots of people's houses and streets and so on were flooded. Well, what do you think happened to the fields around there? I mean, there must have been a lot of water lying on those fields, and as a result, probably lots of the phosphorus.
It sure was.
Yeah, ended up running off into ditches. So what happens is the runoff gets into ditches and streams, and it all runs up into Lake Winnipeg, or if not Lake Winnipeg, some of our other lakes around southern Manitoba, Pelican Lake, Killarney Lake, and it feeds the toxic blue-green algae that has been growing for the last 25 years. I should make the point that not all blue-green algae contains toxins, but a lot of it does, and you can't tell by just looking at it whether it's toxic or not. So it's very dangerous for animals. Every year there's dogs that die. I don't know about in Manitoba, but other places around the United States, we hear news about that. So it's very, it's also bad for human health. If you just go online and Google toxic blue-green algae, you'll see all the negative problems with that, which unfortunately I don't feel that we're paying nearly enough attention to. And the reason why we feel so strongly that the increased problems with Lake Winnipeg are related to our factory style hog industry here is because in the 1990s, the amount of phosphorus getting into the lake shot up. They've been able to measure the amount of phosphorus getting into Lake Winnipeg way back for 100 years now, back to 1920. And up until about 1970, the amount was approximately the same every year. From 1970, when Hydro started regulating the lake, until 1990, it grew slightly. But from 1990 on, until the last measurement that I can find is 1995, it just shot up the amount of phosphorus getting into the lake. And if you compare that to the growth in the hog industry, as I mentioned earlier, we used to raise at the most 2 million pigs a year here in about 1990. By 1995 and late 90s, it was more like 8 million. And so the intensification, the number of these factory style barns, that all results in all that manure, which the industry calls good fertilizer. Yes, it might be good fertilizer if we had it spread out over millions of acres, but it's so heavy to transport that we know that these hog producers don't want to go more than a few miles from where their lagoon is because it's really expensive to transport that manure, and it's really difficult, I think, to inject it if you're more than a few kilometers away. So the amount of manure is a big part of this problem. Beyond that, the gases that I mentioned that come up from the manure pit under the barn, as well as gases that are emitted from the manure lagoon, and when they are applying that manure, that includes hydrogen sulfide, methane, ammonia. It's really not just obnoxious smelling, but it can cause people to become sick. As I mentioned, in the confined space of those barns, it can cause the pigs to all suffocate if their ventilation goes off. And just think of it this way. If the ventilation is working, that's blown out into the neighboring community. And depending which way the wind goes, and depending how close you live to that barn, if you're within a couple of kilometers of that barn, you can just be overwhelmed by this horrendous noxious odors. And Bill can probably tell us a little bit about that from his own personal experience. Now, just one more thing on the environmental concerns that I want to mention is that the provincial government actually did a fair amount of research about this back in between 2000 and 2012, maybe. And they actually did an analysis of what are the main sources of phosphorus and nitrogen. Those are the two things that are feeding the algae blooms. And one of the things that they came up with was a pie chart that if I could show you pictures, I would, but it's about where is the phosphorus coming from within Manitoba. Almost half the phosphorus that gets into the lake is coming outside of Manitoba's borders. It comes from the huge Lake Winnipeg watershed, but half of it is coming from within Manitoba's borders. That's what we have control over. And of that phosphorus that comes from within Manitoba, the government already had said 35% is coming from agriculture, only 12% is coming from the city of Winnipeg. The rest is coming from fairly nebulous sources that really, a lot they call like watershed. Well, really that means runoff from the land. So it's already recognized in some circles that agriculture is contributing far more than the human sewage from Winnipeg. Now, the human sewage from Winnipeg needs to be dealt with. There's no question about that. So I'm not arguing against that, but we've got to start considering the hog industry in how to help Lake Winnipeg. Now, finally, the human health risks. Well, I'm not sure how well known it is that even now, most herds of pigs in these factory style barns are routinely fed a small amount of antibiotic in their feed every day, up until probably just a month or two before they are sent for slaughter. The reason they're fed that antibiotic is because the conditions they're living in is so stressful, so crammed, so not allowing them to behave the way pigs really want to behave, that without receiving that antibiotic, probably lots of them wouldn't survive. Now, the next important thing to know about that is 80% of the antibiotics that are given in Canada go to agricultural animals. As I'm describing, it's not because they're sick, it's because they're fed a tiny subtherapeutic amount. And we know that overprescription of antibiotics is really causing a huge problem with antibiotic resistance in humans. Well, and animals actually. So, I mean, that's a major, major health risk that should be addressed. But if the industry was told you absolutely cannot use antibiotics anymore, I think the whole thing would fold because the animals would not survive.
No, their lungs are too sensitive to survive that, Vicky. Excellent point. But I will give you the 5-minute warning, dear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll just tell you that what we are calling for is that the industry has to phase out these factory style barns that use the liquid manure system. What we are proposing is that pigs need to be raised in more humane conditions on straw, smaller numbers of animals together in situations where in decent weather they can have access to outdoors. Don't feed them, no more antibiotics. So that's about the pig, because that'll go a long way to improve how the pigs are. If they have straw and they have room to move around and room to get outside, that's going to be huge. That the stopping of the use of liquid manure will go a long way to cutting back the runoff that's getting into our lakes. The manure will be composted with the straw before it's applied to the land, and there may be some runoff, but not nearly as much as when it's in the liquid form. We're asking that government stop subsidizing this industry by giving grants to big companies that want to open big new barns and so on, or big new slaughterhouses. We're asking that instead government try and offer some incentives to farmers who might want to switch to the systems we're talking about, might want to offer some kind of financial incentive to stopping the use of the liquid manure and moving to straw-based. We're asking that universities and government make sure that there's some training for people to actually work in the barns with animals and to understand some of these animals' behavior, so that they're not going to be afraid of, providing a bit more care to the animals. So just the final thing I have to say is people sometimes say, well, what can we do to change this? It's a massive problem, and it's right, it is. But the more people who we can talk to about it, we can really make sure they understand why we're pointing the finger at the hog industry, along with human sewage regarding the lake. But I think we know that governments don't lead. They follow what they think the general public cares about and wants to see change. So we've got to create so much more awareness and so much more public outcry about the inhumaneness of this industry. So how to do that is really to try and give every opportunity to talk about it with your friends, your network, your family, to write a letter to your own MLA saying, this needs to be changed. It's not acceptable. That's really, and then of course, not to be buying pork unless you know that it's come from family farms where the animals are humanely treated. But I know a lot of people have already stopped eating pork. So anyway, thanks so much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer questions after if you have any. But I'll ask Bill to take over now, and I'll just say that Bill has lived on a farm, I think, his entire life. He's got some pigs of his own, 3 little pigs. So he's definitely not a factory farmer. And he's actually written a book, which is really fascinating, about his own experiences from childhood, combined with his experiences fighting an illegal barn near him in Grosse Isle. So Bill has some really tremendous information for us. I'm going to hand it over to you, Bill, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Vicki. That was excellent. Bill, please take it away. You're ready to go?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Janine?
Yes, we can. Thank you. And again, I apologize. I have an unstable internet connection, so that's why my camera is not on. Go ahead, please, Bill.
All right. Well, thanks, Vicki, for that very lovely introduction. And yeah, I've farmed all my life. I actually was able to afford to farm by being in the education system. I was a elementary school teacher in rural schools for 10 years, and then I became a principal, and I was 23 years principal in schools just in this area. My wife, Dorothy, taught in an inner city school in Winnipeg in grade 4. And so we both have had that experience, and it was very good for me to work particularly as a principal, where I could be a children's advocate. Did a lot of work in child abuse prevention and that sort of thing, and that then led to me leading a group here in our community, as Vicki mentioned, to deal with an illegal hog barn on a Hutterite colony nearby. When I wrote the book, once the colony became aware of it, and it was well read in the colony, and of course the change in administration helped a bit, but since that time our problems with smell from the hog barn have not been as severe. And I like to attribute it to writing the book, but perhaps it was a change in administration over there that helped as well. So I did 2 things when we kind of concluded our battle which went on for about 15 years. And one was writing the book, and the other was joining Hogwatch. And when I joined Hogwatch, my role sort of evolved into going about the province and speaking with people who had concerns about hog barns in their area. Brent did a bit of work with me on that. We went out and visited a number of municipalities. But I have I think, a very interesting story that I want to relate to you about a particular situation not far from the community of Grandview in northwestern Manitoba. And it involves a creek. And the name of the creek is Munson Creek. And it's not one that you would find on any map, really. There's some highway maps that kind of allude to it a bit, but it's a beautiful little stream. I got to know about Munson Creek when I went out there and talked to a fellow by the name of Charlie. Now, Munson Creek rises in the Riding Mountains and winds its way through beautiful rolling country to empty into the Valley River near the foot of the Turtle Mountains, about 10 miles west of Grandview. If you're familiar with that country between the Riding Mountains and the Duck Mountains, it's rolling, it's rather light sandy soil with some deposits of gravel and traces of Lake Agassiz left behind there. Beautiful country, wooded open areas, some farming goes on, some ranching, and so on. Anyways, Charlie's regenerative farm is located about a half mile from Munson Creek and about 2 miles from the intensive livestock operation that I'm going to talk about today. Besides farming, Charlie raises and trains horses. He and his wife have 10 children, all of whom learned to swim amongst the river chub, sticklebacks, jackfish, and suckers that lived and thrived in the creek and sometimes provided food for Charlie's family. Then in early 2002, word came that a commercial hog barn proposal had been put forward to build several intensive operations near Munson Creek. Charlie and his wife took on the challenge. The first thing Charlie did was to take water samples and have them tested by an accredited lab. A very intelligent move. I have the results of these tests from 2007. Phosphorus was 0.12 milligrams per liter, and nitrogen was 0.57 milligrams per liter, and E. coli was 17 units per 100 milliliters of water. That was in 2002, before the barn was built. Charlie started a petition against the development and got over 500 signatures, including people from the local First Nations. But as in so many cases, all to no avail. He organized a very well-attended community meeting at which the president of Hogwatch, Fred Tate, spoke eloquently to the concerned community members. But as happens so often, the local population's concerns do not take precedence over commercial interests, and the project went forward. Charlie wasn't done. He was determined to do his best to protect the creek and his home. He took a video of the contractor building the manure storage facility. These facilities are supposed to be lined with clay to supposedly make them watertight. There's a shortage of clay found naturally in that area. And when Charlie shared the video of the construction of the lagoon with conservation, it was found that there was insufficient clay to make a proper lining. And they made the contractor fill in the hole and start again. Again, Charlie took video, showed it to conservation. And again, it was filled in and started a third time. This time, Charlie was unable to video the process, but the contractor told him afterwards that groundwater was seeping into the bottom of the manure storage facility. That means, of course, that the manure storage facility is open to groundwater and is polluting the surrounding environment. The story continues. After about 3 years of the hog barns being in operation, the fish started to disappear and Charlie's children stopped swimming in Munson Creek. One local person took a job in the barns and eventually left because of ongoing respiratory problems. No one else from the community wanted to work there after that. People in the near proximity to the barns could not live in their homes anymore because of the smell and sold out to the company. The operator brought in workers from Nicaragua. During COVID, because commercial flights were not operating, the operator apparently chartered a plane to take sick workers back to that country and bring in more workers. Those people used the homes that had been vacated and were kept isolated from the community. I got to know Charlie and his wife in 2021 and heard the story. I took samples from Munson Creek in 2021 and 2022 and had them tested by an accredited lab. These are some of the results. Phosphorus was 0.39 milligrams per liter, 3 times what it was in 2002. Nitrogen was 2.12 milligrams per liter, again, 3 times what it was in 2002. And E. coli, 116 CFUs per 100 milliliters, 6 times what it was in 2002. When I went out there in the spring of 2022 to take samples, you could see the manure and the water running down the hillsides of the spreading fields into the creek. So there it stands. This is an example of human and environmental costs the intensive pig industry has created for Manitoba. In my travels across the province, mostly promoting my book, but also talking to people who have suffered from these hog barns, some of these stories are really quite tragic and poignant. I remember one lady near Killarney, Manitoba, and a development that was occurring there in just the past 4 or 5 years. And she lived on a 100-year farm. And that means that her family has owned this farm for 100 years. And she was looking at the prospects of having to leave her home because of the smell. That is just not right. I wanted just to say, Vicki, I was at an NDP meeting here on the weekend, on Sunday night, and Minister Tracy Schmidt, the Climate and Conservation Minister, was there. And she said that, again, really going back to the amount of pollution that Winnipeg causes, she said that the North End sewage plant, the one that's been in the news a lot, contributes 4% of the nutrients to Lake Winnipeg. That's all, just 4%. She did say that the government intends to make the improvements necessary to that plant in working with the city of Winnipeg. They're going ahead with that. But it's still only 4%. So I guess I'll leave it at that. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to share Charlie's story.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for that. Yes, there's a lot of sadness involved in many levels with this kind of industrial exploitation of agriculture. Agriculture needs to be on a smaller, more compassionate, more sustainable basis. So is there anyone that would like to ask any questions or make any statements generated by what Bill has shared with us and what Vicki has shared? I guess Brent's not going to make it tonight. Maybe I'll send him a message and see if he's
I actually just did that, Janine.
Oh, yes?
I just sent Brent a message, text and an email, but I haven't heard back from him. So I'm sorry.
Thank you, Vicki.
I don't know what's happened.
Okay, looks like Laura has a question. Please go ahead, Laura.
I'd just like to thank you for the work that you've done, and it's been a long time that you've been working on it. And I'm just wondering, has any progress been made on this, or are they just so powerful, these intensive hog operations, that there just doesn't seem to be any way to penetrate and get this remedied somehow?
Well, it is true that I've been involved in trying to do something for pigs, starting way back probably in 1996 or something. And then Hog Watch was officially formed in 2000. What I will say is, I think there's progress in the sense that back in 96, I feel that there are many, many more people who are aware of this. And there are many more people who have chosen not to eat pork anymore. That gives me some hope. But I have to say that all of us at Hog Watch, from about 2000 until 2017, we kind of went dormant because the previous, the Selinger government had put a moratorium more or less on any new hog barn development. And so we kind of, I guess we just kind of let the reins go and thought, well, hopefully this industry is really going to die. And then in 2017, it just started to flourish again under the Conservatives. I think it is, you know what, it is a David and Goliath battle, because this is global corporate agriculture, but we can't give up. When you look at what's happening around the world, you see that in other areas, they are making progress, and really there's no reason why we can't push and have that happen here in Canada. In the European Union, for example, they're not supposed to be using gestation stalls at all, and that's been in place for over 10 years. I just noticed some news that in the Netherlands, they're legislating that the number of animals raised, pigs, chickens, and cows, needs to decrease by possibly 30% over the next decade, because they're so concerned about the pollution. Is someone else trying to speak? Because
That's fine, Vicki. Maren will speak after you're finished. I'll call on Maren after you're finished. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. Don't forget that in the state of California, they had a plebiscite there, and so many of the public can't stand the idea of the treatment of pigs, what's happening, and so they made a law that says there's no pork sold in the whole state of California that originated from farms that use gestation stalls. And that has had a ripple effect all the way up to Canada. And that's because there were so many people. I mean, California, I think, tends to be kind of a progressive place, but there were obviously so many people who were so offended by what was happening to these poor animals that they made that law, and that actually has impacts up here, because we're not Manitoba Pork here was trying to fight it, because we send a lot of little piglets down to the States to be finished, and most of them came from gestation stalls, so they're not going to be allowed to be sold in California. The meat is not, yeah. So I think we need to pay attention.
That is inspiring progress. Thank you, Vicki.
Yeah.
Okay, Maren, you wanted to speak?
Yes.
And you've got a big thumbs up from Debbie and the gang of fur.
Okay. I just want to say, I think labeling would make a difference in many ways, especially for the consumers who have the choice what kind of pork they're buying. So if it's raised in a more natural way with straw and all these things, I think a lot of people would be willing to pay more for it, but they just don't know to find, unless you're going directly to the farm and know the producer, you will find out. But otherwise, especially for people that don't have that chance to come out to the country, they cannot really distinguish if it's on the market. I'm not sure. In Europe, they do some of it. I'm not exactly sure how far they are with that. But even if it's more humanely produced in many ways, if there would be labeling for that, or if it's an organic way, or all these kind of things, I think as a consumer, we have a hard time to decide right now, or to say what we are eating there and where it comes from. And that would make a big difference, I think. So instead of pushing, I mean, definitely pushing on the hog industry, I understand the government and all that, but also on labeling, so that we as a consumer know what we're buying and can make choices. So we can actually say, I don't buy this, I pay more for something that I can agree on how they produce it. So that was just my comment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Maren. Excellent points. Jenna, please go ahead.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank Bill and Vicki for making them and also taking the time to educate us all. This is more of just a comment and a thought. I've kind of noticed in the animal advocacy work that I've done that sadly it's hard to get the general population to care a lot about animals who are farmed. And what Bill shared in his story were things that I didn't know about, people having to leave their homes and a plane being chartered to Nicaragua to send sick people home and bring back people and kind of house them in these empty houses and keep them away from the general public. I just kind of wonder, like, if there's, I think about how Manitoba porks, what is they're saying, good for me, good for MD, good for Manitoba. And they promote themselves from all these different angles. Oh, here's our animal care strategies. Here's what we do for the environment. Here's the jobs we create. Like, I'm almost wondering if we could do some kind of like campaign where we talk about all the issues, the workers' rights issues, the human health issues, the environment, the animals, and just, I mean, we need some money, but really like blow it up as big as we can. Just a thought or a dream or a hope.
Here, no, that's exactly what has to happen. This is just wrong on so many levels and inefficient on so many levels. We just have to keep talking about it and make as much of a stink as we can.
Could I say a thing or two here?
So, sure, go ahead.
One of the things that I've noticed as I travel around the province is that there's a lot of discouragement on the part of people who've been struggling with hog barns for a number of years. And I totally understand why that is. And I think what we need to do is to try and reach more of an audience, more people that would be concerned about this, more urban people, that are purchasing pork and so on. And I think we also need to get the word out there. I was at a meeting, NDP meeting on Sunday night, and Tracy Schmidt, the minister, actually brought up the subject of hog barns, and one person spoke up right away in favor of the hog barns and that she shouldn't be blaming them, and so forth. And then two other individuals got up to speak and violently opposed to hog barns, each of which had a bad experience in their community with them. And so that gave me the opportunity to get up and speak on behalf of Hogwatch a little bit and ask the minister for a meeting. And I totally agree with Vicky on the number of things that she said in terms of the politics of all this, but I think there might be more of an opportunity for us with this government, and certainly than there was with the last one. And we as Hogwatch have been writing letters, and mostly Vicky's writing letters to various departments. We have a situation out in the Broken Head municipality on the Broken Head River, where the Hutteray colony is proposing a development that has all kinds of problems. And we've actually had several meetings with government officials over that, and hopefully now we're going to get a meeting with the conservation minister. So I think the time is ripe for us to do something. I think that article that appeared in the Free Press, Vicky, I think that was part of the reason why the minister talked about hog barns at the meeting in Winnipeg Beach there on Sunday night. My wife was at a staff get-together, retired staff get-together today, and several people commented on that letter as well. So I think there are some positive things happening. As I say, I think this is a good opportunity to push this issue now, where we have a government that's possibly more receptive to us than in the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yes, I think folks are agreeing with you. Let's hear from Laura and then Debbie. Go ahead, please, Laura.
Mine is actually more of an organic question. I'm not sure if I should ask it here, but I'll just see what you think. I'm just curious about the types of crops that the pig manure is being used on. And as a vegan, I'm not particularly wanting to be eating vegetables or grains or whatever that have been using pig manure as their fertilizer. And I'm just curious, if it was organic, would that mean no pig manure, or how does that work?
The organic standard requires that the animal be allowed to turn around. So no manure from confinement hog operations is allowed in organic agriculture.
So
because we insist that
okay.
animals need to be able to express their innate behaviors.
Okay,
And
so
this confinement doesn't do that.
So that is a thing where in organic farming that the animals have to be humanely
Yes.
treated
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
I worked on that in the early 90s, Laura, ensuring that the organic standards in Canada had humane standards incorporated with them. That was part of the work I did with the Canadian organic standards and continue to do on the organic standards. Because my grandfather raised pigs, just a small number, but I know how intelligent and sentient and what excellent mothers they are. And so that lets me know what torture they endure under these hideous circumstances. Okay, sorry for that intro, Debbie, but I know you're another one not scared to call cruelty cruelty. So your turn to talk, dear Tag, you're it.
Thank you. Question for Vicky. When you talked about the massive die-off of pigs as a result of ventilation failure, who's compensating the farmers for that? Is that through insurance, or is the government paying them? And I also would like to know what happens to the corpses of those pigs. That's going to present a public health concern as well.
Yes, there's we're not sure what happens to the corpses, but we believe that mostly they are buried. And when that incident happened out in Western Manitoba, south of Virden here, I don't know if it was last winter or the winter before, when there was about 2,000 animals died. We believe they were buried on the property. And we think that because of photographs that were taken that would show that there was a particular area on that property that was warmer than the rest, which would mean decomposing animals under the surface. And I'd just like to mention too, Laura, your question, pig manure is used as in non-organic operations as a fertilizer, and it's used with any cereal crops or other crops, canolas, peas, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's considered to be a fertilizer. And when it's applied according to nitrogen, and they don't even measure the phosphorus. So whatever the phosphorus is, it's just a wild card, and the phosphorus is put out there with the nitrogen. They don't measure that. And in fact, as Vicky mentioned, the province allows 5 times more than the crops require. And one of the reasons for that is because there's such a concentration of hog barns in the Red River Valley and Steinbach area and so forth, that if they reduce that the amount that of fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus that can be applied to the land, they'd have to get rid of about 4 out of 5 hog barns, because there's such a concentration of hog barns in that area that the manure is over applied. And most of it's injected. There's a cultivator, or there's a pipe that's pulled behind a cultivator, behind a tractor, and it's injected. And those, to my knowledge, the furthest they can go from the manure storage facility is about 5 kilometers, which means then that the fields that are closest to the manure storage facility are saturated. So, and you get those concentrations, and that's when the trouble begins. The Pork Council would lead you to believe that there are a great deal of this manure is injected. Excuse me, when in fact, if it is injected, like in our situation here, the colony was supposedly injecting manure in, and it was raining, and there were pools of water in the fields. And I took pictures of that and sent them to conservation. The conservation officer arrived about 2 weeks later, and there was still evidence of manure in the ditches beside the fields. And those ditches drain into Colony Creek, which drains into Almonds Creek, which drains into the Assiniboine River, which drains into the Red River, which drains into Lake Winnipeg. Thank you.
Thank
and
you,
I'll
Bill.
just-
Yes, it's just shameful. Maren, I know Maren was did someone else want to speak? Vicky?
Oh, I just wanted to say that as far as we know, insurance companies will pay for the losses of pigs when they suffocate. I don't believe it's a government thing. And we've wondered sometimes why insurers would continue to insure these barns, but anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Maren, please go ahead.
I was just wondering about organic pork operations in Manitoba. Do we have some? How are the sizes? Are there bigger ones? And where does the meat get sold to? Like, how can people find them? Is it only direct marketing, farm marketing? Or I was just wondering, I have no idea about that. We just produce our own
Right.
pig kind of
I'm-
and eat it.
I know, I don't think Finn's is certified organic. I'm not sure how many are certified organic operations, because most of the direct-to-consumer pork operations are small-scale family farms, and they sell out just by word of mouth. So there's no need for them to be certified. But in order for the animals to be so healthy, they're all on straw and they're in family groups and they're access to the outdoors. And so that means a much healthier, happier animal that doesn't require antibiotics. Organic certification of livestock requires very expensive organic feed. So there were places, we used to work on a program through the Humane Society to publicize Frigs and other places, Zinn farms that do sell farm gate. I've known the Zinn family farm for many, many years, and they do follow organic principles, though I don't believe they're certified. There used to be 3 or 4 certified organic operations. I know because of the pollution from the industrial hog production in Quebec that there is now a $30 million a year organic hog industry. And as Debbie was suggesting earlier, these farmers need to know alternatives. And what's happening in Manitoba right now is most of these barns were built about 30 years ago. They're not barns, as Vicky said. Most of these torture factories were built about 30 years ago and need to be retrofitted. And this hog industry in Manitoba does come hat in hand to the public purse way too often. And I do think that it's now time for the government to say, let us subsidize you to more humane production methods. Let's retool these barns so the animals are on straw. Let's do away with this system that's producing antibiotic resistance. Some of you may know I had to have a hip replaced 10 years ago. And at the rate that antibiotic resistance is growing, 75% of the people in 2050 that have a hip replacement will die of infection that can't be treated if the rate of antibiotic resistance continues to grow at the current rate today. So that became very real for me, that I did not need to take antibiotics. I did not have any infection, but to know such a high percentage would die. And that is because these animals are in torture chambers. They cannot live without this antibiotics. And Vicky and I have written to the Veterinaries Association. They are complicit because they write the letters that allow this antibiotic use to go on, allowing the mistreatment of these animals and the pollution of our environment. So I thank all of you that are vegans and choose not to eat pork. Of course, I don't eat pork and haven't for many, many years, and encourage everybody. We just need to talk about to everyone we know who shares our values to demand the government stop this terrible production model. We started it, we can stop it. They need to help the farmers get off it and change the whole system around, because they're not spending any money on monitoring the manure. So nobody knows how much pollution is going on. Okay, Debbie, go ahead.
I just want to sort of go a little bit further with the health messaging, like the way these animals are raised, any animals in these industrial situations. It's checking off all the boxes necessary, that could lead to the next pandemic. And we've just been through one, so we don't need any more. Thank you. The World Health Organization has designated processed meat, so that would be bacon, etc., as a class 1 carcinogen. That's the same as cigarettes and asbestos. And if you look at our Canada Food Guide, meat and dairy products no longer even appear as their own groups on that guide. So part of the messaging too has to be an overall reduction in meat consumption, because now that this also extends to our healthcare system, which is being bogged down with chronic diseases that are fueled by our food choices.
Yes, exactly, Debbie. All our choices are political in this day and age, and to be subsidizing as we do such a heinous industry as this will be just seen as the dark days at some point. Please go ahead, Jenna.
Hi, my partner Jordan actually has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much a question or just a comment. And maybe like Bill can speak to it, but my background is in civil engineering, so I kind of know a lot about drainage and this and that. And I know in the kind of rural areas with land development and stuff, is there any, I don't know, in terms of treatment or like preventing runoff and phosphorus and all that stuff, there's been a lot of destruction of wetlands. And I know you've got groups like Ducks Unlimited and stuff that are trying to kind of bring that stuff back. Is there any incentives or anything to kind of try and keep or slow the runoff of the stuff that comes off farms that creates phosphorus and algae blooms and all that stuff? Is there any kind of incentive or anything for farmers to maybe bring back wetlands on their properties? Or
yes, there is some programs. If you get involved with your local watershed district, for example, there are various initiatives that go on, but mostly it's mostly on the part of the watershed district itself. There is a lot of land, and Janine lives and and works right in the midst of all this. There's a lot of this kind of land that is being broken that shouldn't be broken. I'd like to tell you another story, if I may, about a hog barn, or a couple of hog barns up near a place called Silver, which is up by south of Arbor in the Interlake. Now, that country is filled with limestone, and there's only in places about an inch of topsoil. And Lake Manitoba is about 10 feet higher than Lake Winnipeg. And the water seeps through this limestone all through the Interlake area. And closer to Lake Winnipeg, there are a number of artesian wells that flow mostly into the Icelandic River, and the Icelandic River, of course, flows into Lake Winnipeg as well. So I was called out there by a resident who wanted to show me a problem, and so here we have an artesian well which had been capped, but the capping didn't work, and it was flowing at the rate of a fire hydrant, I would say. And it's flowing down this municipal ditch, and about 4 or 5 miles down the ditch is the Icelandic River. And this municipal ditch emptied into the Icelandic River, and the Icelandic River had about 6 miles and was flowing into Lake Winnipeg. And so what had happened was, and this was in the municipality of Armstrong, which would be, in my opinion, one of the worst municipalities that had a program of inviting hog barns into their area. And what this one company did was they bought a quarter section of land and they broke all the bush on it. Now this land was, the soil was maybe an inch thick. You couldn't farm it, you couldn't work it, but provincial regulations allowed them to broadcast the manure from their barn onto this quarter section of land. So here's the municipal road and this ditch that's got a stream of water in it that's similar to what you would expect from a broken fire hydrant flowing down it. And on the one side there is a hog barn sitting on a quarter section of the type of land that I described. And on the other side of the road is another hog barn sitting on a quarter section of land, which also has been bulldozed. And they're spreading the manure, broadcasting the manure on that land on both sides of this municipal ditch. So, I mean, you know, it was an ecological disaster. There was just no way you could see anything else. And what I did was I knew the MLA actually in the area, so I went and told him about it, and he said, "Oh, I thought that well had been capped." Well, they had attempted to cap it, but it wasn't successful. So there you have two hog barns. The land should never have been broken in the first place. I was at a watershed meeting in Brandon here last winter. Hogwatch sent me. And one of the councillors from Armstrong, when this whole topic came up about pushing down bush and so forth and putting barns there and spreading the manure in these areas, one of the councillors from Armstrong, excuse me, spoke up and said, well, why are we allowing this land to be broken in the first place? And I think that is the problem, that the government needs to create regulations whereby just any person or company can go and push the bush down, you know, on these marginal lands and install a hog barn and be able to broadcast the manure, which is, you know, close to rivers or creeks, marshes, whatever. So it's a big problem, and the government is doing a little bit in terms of the watershed.
Yes.
But there needs to be some type of regulation, and there needs to be some type of enforcement. And I know Janine is just dying to get into this.
Yes, because they're not enforcing. You know, recently they were pushing down bush in my area. Again, bush that holds the moisture. The engineer, sorry, was it Kevin, was speaking about there's a lot of marsh forest that holds the water back, that they're just allowing them to push down, to very frustrating their own regulations. And that's because they don't have environment and conservation have the lowest budgets of all the departments. And so just as Greens, we need to say, we need justice for the environment and justice for these sentient animals. We need to find a way of supporting this industry to help them get off the torture and move away from it. So that's definitely incentivize transferring out of producing pork, supporting, like the Green Party does, supporting vegetable-based protein production for people, much healthier, not people, but for the land. And in organics, if manure is taken from a non-organic, there's a hierarchy. First, it should be from on the farm or from nearby. And if there's an industrial type barn where there might be a chance that there's antibiotics, they have to compost it. And Debbie, your point is well made, There have been some manure from industrial chicken barns that is so full of antibiotics that it can't compost. So I've inspected market gardens, organic market gardens that were trying to compost industrial manure that had too high a level of antibiotics in it for it to compost. So yes, we do require testing and we require composting if there are issues about the antibiotics or genetic modification in the manure. Let's hear from Danae now. Please go ahead, Danae.
Hi, thanks, Janine. Thank you so much to Vicky and Bill. You've all raised really good points. I guess I'm just wondering why, with so much contemporary research on the negative and environmental impacts of animal versus plant-based food systems, that why is the end goal to transition to small-scale operations rather than transitioning to a plant-based food system altogether and just get away from all of this?
Yes, if there were government funding to support agriculture of that scope, definitely that's a vision that we have with the Green Party. That's very clear. That's one of the reasons why I was delighted to support the foundation of a vegan caucus, because we really need to transform agriculture. Agriculture right now is responsible for 36% of the greenhouse gases emitted in Canada. We need a totally different agriculture. And I do believe that as people educate themselves about the important role that health plays and that diet plays in health, they will, as I do, move towards a all plant-based diet as much as possible. Those choices have real impacts, and we need to educate more and more folks about it. And so personally, this is one of the main reasons why I agreed to stand as leader of the Green Party, because I think it's very important that we educate people in the city about where their food comes from and what kind of agriculture they're actually supporting. Okay, Dennis, please share what you have to share.
Excellent. Thank you, Janine. And thanks to you, Vicky and Bill, for your participation tonight and all the work you've been doing over the years. I too was a member of Hogwatch in the early days, and I know the work that you've been doing is just incredible. So I do have a few questions, but I'll try to make them relatively quick and maybe just hit on them for a discussion another time possibly. But one is subsidies. Do we know how much these intensive hog operations, and note I don't ever call them hog barns or farms, they're intensive livestock operations. Do we have any sense of how much in the way of subsidies they receive? Janine, you mentioned subsidies earlier. Second question would be, what do we know about the sources of workers in slaughterhouses? In the early days, workers would come from one part of the world, and then after they were exhausted, the industry would go to another part of the world, and it would just keep going in that kind of vicious circle. I'm curious what the worker supply is like now for slaughterhouses, say at the Brandon plant and Nepo and so forth. And then the third is to do with the odor, because I think city folks like myself, when they get that whiff, start wondering, like, what is that? Is it manure or is it the mushroom plant? Do we know the source of the odor when Winnipeg gets hit? And we've been getting hit mostly in the fall in recent years. And is it because of hog manure spreading? Is it because of the mushroom plant? And what's in those gases? I mean, there are all sorts of things: hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, volatile organic compounds. And do we know much about the health of folks maybe like yourselves, Janine and Bill, who've lived by these intensive hog operations over time? What impact has that had on your respiratory and cardiovascular health? So a whole bunch of questions. Maybe if each panelist can tackle one of those questions briefly, and look forward to further conversations in the future. Thank you.
Whoa, okay. Who wants to start?
Well, I could a little bit about acetaldehyde, which is an organic gas compound, volatile organic compound. And just another story about a resident out by Brokenhead who came to us and complaining about the odors from the hog operation that was just over a mile from his home. And we actually have some equipment where we can measure hydrogen sulfide in parts per billion and methane and ammonia in parts per million, and volatile gases, mainly acetaldehyde, in parts per billion. And so I went out there with the equipment and we did some testing. He did some testing. And it turns out that he has, in the manure that's coming onto his, or the smell that's coming onto his property, he has fairly high concentrates of acetaldehyde. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, his spouse suffers from dementia. And if you look at the research on acetaldehyde, it does say that acetaldehyde can have an effect on people, and the effect is increased levels of dementia. And this was a pretty kind of an interesting case, but when I attempted to pursue it with him, he just didn't want to pursue it. I had some ideas of things that we might have done to push this case forward, but he just did not want to. He was I think 82 years old at that point, and he was tired, and he just didn't want the hassle anymore, because of course what happens in these situations very often, and I've seen this over and over, is that these people who start complaining, we have a situation that we're working with right now on the Broken Head River, and the person who is the main complainant in this situation, and we've had meetings with the municipality, we've had meetings with the department over this, and we're going to have further meetings. Well, what happens is this person is isolated in the community, and oftentimes the hog barn operator will buy feeds and things from people that are nearby, and they don't want to create a fuss. They don't want to be seen as a troublemaker and so on, and they just quietly endure, and that's really unfortunate. And in this particular case, this was the case with this gentleman who was quite isolated in the community, and he had had enough, and his wife was sick and so on. So it's another tragic story, really. But there were significant levels of acetaldehyde on his yard. Now, it doesn't really answer your question, I know, but that is an example of what's happening out there. And when it comes to acetaldehyde, there are very few regulations. There are no regulations, in fact, on acetaldehyde that's found outside. There are some regulations, some levels federally on acetaldehyde that's found inside buildings, but not on the outside in the environment.
Thank you for that technical information, Bill. I just want to briefly say that on the subject of slaughterhouse workers, one of the issues is humane treatment of the workers, because there's so much repetitive stress injury that they get, they're here exploited, get damaged from the repetitive stress, and then shipped home without the support for the industries, for the injuries they have undertaken. So that's just another avenue of this area that it makes it not feasible. And yes, Aaron Brockovich, if I was a bit sexier, I would think of that too, because I want to stop these guys, just like she stopped the pollution that was killing the families. That's the same thing that's happening here, but we just have a lower population. So Vicky, did you want to respond to any of Dennis's powerful questions there?
Well, my main response is we really need help, Dennis, to get the answers to a lot of these questions. regarding the amount of subsidy. We hope to actually get somebody to pull that together soon. But I will tell you one example that happened 2 or 3 years ago. A great big new facility around the Plumas area was being proposed. It was a company, I think, from the Netherlands, Top Pigs, and they were building a new facility that was going to do a lot of research about breeding. There was tremendous outcry from the community. I think both Bill and I, maybe Janine as well, participated in the public hearing about it. But there were at least 40 or 50 local residents opposed to it. However, it was approved. The council approved it. And then, to our shock, within a couple of weeks, it became clear that both the federal government and the provincial government had committed $1 million each to this company, Top Pigs, to get them to build their facility here in Manitoba. So the whole public hearing where 50 local residents spoke, it was really just a farce because the decision was already made. The company had been given $2 million to come and build here instead of building somewhere else. So I think that's the kind of subsidy that we're talking about. I don't know about individual barns getting any kind of subsidy, but yeah, that was really shocking and really discouraging. Regarding the smell in Winnipeg, frankly, I've often wondered myself, what is that from? Is it the mushrooms plant? Is it the rendering plant? Because we still have a maple leaf rendering plant for dead animals. Or could it be manure being spread? And honestly, I'm just not sure where to turn to try and find that answer.
That's the kind of information they don't want to share, Dennis. They don't want to tell us what's going on, just like they don't want to track the phosphorus runoff. They don't want to enforce the Manure Regulation Act because it would show that it was not being followed.
Well, as Bill, in your answer, and I thank you for that, both Bill and Vicky and Janine, the pressures due to the economics are immense. And if there's an individual, they're squished like a bug. If there's a group of 40, 50 local residents, they're squished like a bigger bug. You know, you need thousands of people to stand up and, you know, argue the case that we've for many years. And I think, you know, we're seeing more of that around the world where there are class action lawsuits that are pinning industries to the kind of root causes of the climate emergency. And similarly, these industries, I think, will soon be brought to account. And maybe it is through what's in that gas that's, you know, affecting the immediately neighboring communities. But I think also it's probably going to have some impact as it moves downwind to the larger metropoli like Winnipeg. And so it's not just an irritant. There's probably something to it as well that affects human health. But I see Marin's hand up, and I thank you again for all your participation, Bill, Vicky, and Janine.
Thank you, Dennis. Yes, Marin, please go ahead. Or Bill, you wanted to speak first?
Oh, yeah, just briefly. It's too bad Brent isn't here because he's much more knowledgeable on this than I am. But Maple Leaf just divided their company, right? And they've divided the slaughtering plant from their holdings in hog barns and pigs. Like Maple Leaf owns a lot of pigs in Manitoba, rents them out, and they own some barns as well. And they've split the company. And Brent and I had a conversation about this, and I asked him, well, what is this all about? And it's his belief that Maple Leaf is trying to distance itself from the way that pigs are raised, because they want to sell a product that consumers might think is more ecologically acceptable. And so that's why they've split the company. I have no other information about this except for my conversation with Brent, who's quite up on these things.
I do believe that's the reason, because more and more consumer pressure. So folks, I think we are at a cusp of change, and that we will not so long be voices in the wilderness as we have been, and more people are ready to listen. Please go ahead, Maren.
Yeah, I think I believe in the power of the consumer as well. And I just received my rebate check from Minister Schmidt for my electric vehicle. Very exciting. And so I think farmers too, like that want to switch into smaller barns with pigs, need encouragement, financial encouragement from the government to make the switch. You know, even the small organic farmer that is maybe very small now might be a little bit bigger with some help, and maybe there can be more meat produced in a better way. And then the consumer has a choice to buy that, and not just a few out here. I mean, to say no one should eat pork anymore, okay, it would be good, but we will not get there. People still have their own decisions to make on that. But if there is something produced in a very much better way, and marketed that way and labeled that way, and then paid for as necessary for the farmer to produce it that well, and it shouldn't be eaten as much. So definitely there has to be a price to it. Pricing is very important. No cheap meat, you know, that can only be produced the way it is right now, is very important. So I think that it needs to be a lot of more funding for the farmers to make the switches and to go into that it makes it worthwhile. It's a lot of work to raise animals. It's not easy, and it's a lot of work, and it's not getting paid well enough. And in many ways, that's why big operations are out here, because that's the only way you can make a living.
Unfortunately, there are very few small producers anymore in the province of Manitoba. High Life and Maple Leaf hold a monopoly on the industry, and there are a number of Hutterite colonies, which you could argue are other companies that are in pigs, but there are very few independent operators anymore.
Yes, because government subsidies have been geared to the industrial large-scale model. They talk about efficiencies, but the efficiencies don't deal with things like pollution. They externalize costs and don't even account for quality of life of the animal or quality of life of the worker. Well, we're getting pretty close to the top of the hour. I wouldn't be a responsible leader if I didn't thank those of you who are members, and encourage those of you who have joined us who are not members to please join. And please do continue to continue this conversation with people you know who care about animals, because I truly believe if all of the folks that love their cats and dogs and pets and turtles and snakes and salamanders and hamsters and gerbils and kittens knew what was going on in these hog barns, they would be outraged, and they would join us in calling for change. I know it's hard to stick your neck out, but I'm proud to be in the company of the people that spoke on this panel. We're going to continue speaking truth to power. We ask you to speak to your loved ones and your neighbors, to join us at the Green Party, to join us at Hogwatch Manitoba, to join us in moving towards a plant-based diet if that's what's right for them, as it is for so many. And thank you so much for your interest in this topic tonight. Would anyone else like to make any closing remarks?
I just
I
want to
see
say,
lots of
I just want to
gratitude
say thank you
being
very much.
expressed. Go ahead, Vicki.
I just want to say thank you to you, Janine, and the Green Party for organizing this. Every opportunity we can get to speak to people and bring a few more people into the circle will make a huge difference. So, and if anybody is inclined to try and offer some help to Hogwatch, we're all volunteers, and so please send us an email and we'll talk to you about how you could possibly help. There's lots to be done. Anyway, thank you so much for organizing this.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. Thank you. See lots of hands up, lots of congratulations. Well, thank you all so much for joining together. I just want to close with a quote from, I think it was Eli Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor, said the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. So thank you for not being apathetic. Thank you for living the love that you have in your hearts. Thank you all for your caring tonight. We have a greater impact than we know. There's more good in the world than we know. So thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
night. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Nice.